This is my guy, Armaan Agah, get the bag underscore Agah, as he's known as on the gram. Bro, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm excited. We got some stuff to talk about today.
Just first and foremost, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the nice little intro. I know it's been a while, just seeing you like post all these videos and just being like a journalist kind of inspires me to kind of just get my stuff together in terms of like wanting to talk about sports. And obviously you're a big sports guy. I'm a big sports guy, so I feel like it was just a matter of time coming. So just overall, thanks for having me and let's get into it, dude. Let's do
Yes,
it.
sir. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, let's just get right to it. So this was originally, I think, just gonna be like a football video, but then news came out in the NBA that kind of just broke the whole league. I kind of gave my thoughts on it already in a different video, but I wanted to know what your thoughts were on the Damian Lillard trade, because we all thought he was going to get traded at some point, but I don't think anybody was expecting that team to be the Bucks. So what were your thoughts? What was your reaction? What are your thoughts on it?
Um, so when I first saw the news, I instantly thought of you as like you're the only Bucks fan that I know, like in my friend group, and like just you're very like passionate about it. And it kind of reminded me like how I think I told you this too, that like when the Raiders got Devontae and they got the trade, like how happy I was. It kind of reminded me of like I was like, dude, I definitely know how Daniel's feeling for sure. And then also I think overall, like I don't think anyone expected it. Like his major destinations were like obviously Miami, just because I feel like knowing his situation, Portland would grant him the best possible trade, as I thought he's done a pretty like classy job of how he's been handling the trade request. And then obviously looking into Twitter, they're all saying the Raptors just because they lost Fred VanVleet, and they do have some young aspiring pieces that they could develop, I guess. Portland is, as they're trying to like become a much younger team, obviously drafting Scoot. But in terms of like compensation, I think it was a pretty good deal. I mean, it had to be a three-team deal for anything to like happen. Um, I think overall you're getting an average 30 point per game score when healthy, plus Giannis. I think that's lethal as is. Um, and it's not a move to take them over the top, as they have won a championship. Um, but in terms of like on paper, it looks really good. I mean, they did lose obviously Drew, which is in my opinion the best two-way point guard in the league,
Yeah,
especially
without
when
a
it comes
doubt.
to especially when it comes to playoff time as the game slows down. Um, but they also did lose Grayson Allen, which obviously I'm not the biggest fan of, but he's overall a good role player on any championship team. Um, and then obviously the first round picks and the pick swaps. I mean, that's pretty good value in Milwaukee's sense. You're probably gonna have to take the load on the contract. So they might have to rework it just if they want to get more pieces. And then obviously in terms of the Suns, they did lose DeAndre Ayton, but they did get Nurkic, which I think is a very like viable, like consistent option as a starting center. Obviously not the talent Ayton is, but he can still play on a championship team.
Oh, for sure.
Um,
Yeah.
Easy double double guy. But overall, I think this is really good for the Bucks, and I think you mentioned it too when we talked earlier was um, that this gives Giannis another reason to extend and stay with the Bucks. I think that's the one reason why the Bucks were so had to make a move on it and look really urgent with this, was just because they don't want to lose Giannis. Like he is their franchise, he's the guy, right? Like once he leaves, like what is Milwaukee going to be? So
Yeah, no, for sure. Dude, when before the Bucks even drafted him, I said this in my video. I've like read a bunch of stuff on it. They were in danger of relocating to another city because they were just so bad and they couldn't get people in the stands. And yeah, it was just a crazy kind of situation. And you actually touched on two things that I didn't touch on my video. One, the sort of like, yes, the Blazers sent Damian Lillard, I think, to the best situation basketball wise in terms of his chances to win a championship. But you kind of have people saying, and I kind of see this perspective as well, even though I am a big Giannis and Bucks fan, that they could have sent him to, they kind of owed it to him to like at least consider sending him to the destination where he wanted to go, given all that he did for that team. He had so many chances to leave and go somewhere else, and he always decided to stick it out. And I think when he got to the point where he, I don't know, finally decided where it wasn't worth it anymore and he asked out, they didn't do right by him in terms of wanting to send him to where he wanted to go. Because I think if you look at the past NBA stars that have requested a trade, when Kevin Durant was on the Nets, he was adamant, I want to go to the Suns, and that's where he got sent. When James Harden was on the Rockets and he wanted out, he was like, I want to go to the Nets, and they traded him to the Nets. So I think he kind of got, I feel bad for him a little bit in that sense, to where the Blazers were so, I guess, like salty and petty about him requesting a trade that they were so dug in on not sending him to where he wanted to go. But I do think that in the long term, he'll think that he got sent to the best situation basketball wise in terms of his chances to win a championship. And then another thing, you're right, I don't think this happens if it's not a 3-team deal, because I don't think the Blazers would just take Drew Holiday and like 2 first-round picks. I don't think that's enough for Dame, but they got Ayton too. I think he can like have a chance to sort of revitalize himself in a new situation on a young team. All those guys are young players, so they're just going to be figuring out how to make names for themselves and try and win as many games as possible. But yeah, you brought up some really great points, and I think it's just a really good move for the Bucks. They had to do it to keep Giannis. And another thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, I think the other side of this is what is going to happen with Drew Holiday, because we don't really expect the Blazers to keep him. He doesn't really fit their timeline, and he's still an insanely good player. He just made his second All-Star team this past year. Last year, he probably had the best overall season of his career. He put up like 20 points a game, 7 assists, was still a monster on defense. And that's a guy that's going to be available for teams to pursue. So what do you think who do you think should try and pursue him? And then what do you think is going to happen depending on which team gets him?
Well, I would say with Drew, I think Drew's a really interesting one. In terms of like when you really watch him play versus like you're just looking at his accolades, right? Like probably 2-3-time All-Star. When in reality, I think he should have been 4 or 5-time All-Star.
For sure, without a doubt.
I think his rookie year or his second year with Philadelphia before he got traded, he was an All-Star already and was promising. And then when he went to New Orleans, the first couple of years he struggled with injuries, obviously, and then kind of solidified himself as a two-way player, and was still young, right? And then when he went over to the Bucks, I think that's when his kind of career just like took off, where we thought he was going to be early in his career after he left Philadelphia. So in terms of like teams that like I should see or like his future, well, obviously knowing his position, he's a lot older now. He has to go to a contending team, and I think contractually he would want a buyout just so he can pick his destination. But I think just because of his contract, I think Portland wouldn't want that. They want to get some value out of him.
Yeah, because not to cut you off, but when the Bucks traded for him, they gave up 3 firsts. I think he's at least worth a first-round pick or 2. So I think, there's definitely some value there with the Blazers.
Yeah, and like I said, they just don't want to buy him out. Like they don't really see the purpose in that. And I think he should go to a team that is contending, obviously. And I think on Drew's end, he needs to be like willing, if he wants to be on a contending team, to rework his contract just to create cap space. It's hard for me to say because on some teams, like obviously Golden State, he's not going to be starting, obviously, right? But it really depends on what team it is. And it's kind of hard to say. Like some teams that might be in the market, they might not have a lot of cap space. So it really depends on how he wants to rework his contract. And like I said, you mentioned about Portland being willing to give him what he wants. We're like waiting to be seen, because obviously the way they handled the Dame situation was like kind of poor. Obviously not getting Dame to where he wants to be, making him sit out the last 10 games just to tank. I mean, they went 1-9 last year in the last 10
Yeah.
games when they sat Dame. And he was still, like, I would say a good sport about it, at least not throwing fits.
Yeah.
So it kind of just shows you. And I think I wanted to add on to when you mentioned about certain superstar players when they want trades to certain places and they've granted them. I think one that brings up to mind is when the Nets wanted to trade Kyrie, and LA offered him the Lakers offered the Nets the best possible package, but
You're
the
right.
owners refused just
Right.
because it was the Lakers, right?
That did happen.
Sent off to
I
Dallas.
forgot about that.
Right. So I think that's another factor. So honestly, it's really hard for me to say just because I don't know what teams have the cap space for him, and knowing his overall market, just because, like you said, when the Bucks traded for him, 3 first-round picks. I mean, obviously it's not going to be that, but I don't know. I think Drew Marcus Holiday is really hard to assess just because of some key factors that need to be done in order for him to be put in that position, because it's depending on whether teams view him as a starting point guard in a championship winning team, or as just like either a shooting guard or a 6-man in those teams, because obviously depending on that role, the money's going to have to play a factor. So
Yeah, no, definitely. And you brought up that last point about that. I completely forgot that the Joe Tsai basically refused to trade Kyrie where he wanted. And I think that a large part that put into that was how many games he missed, all like the off the court distractions that he was causing. But I don't know. Dame's been the ultimate professional. And I don't know if you saw, but Chris Haynes with Chris Haynes, right? The Bleacher Report dude who's always like on the NBA players. He did an interview with Dame yesterday, and apparently like the Blazers GM, when Dame requested that trade, he was so mad. He was like, even if Damian Lillard, I guess, rescinded the trade request or wanted to come back, he was like, the GM was like, there's no coming back. You've already like soiled the relationship. That's just bullshit to me, because like what this guy's done for your franchise, for your team, I think that if, let's just say in a hypothetical, the Blazers never traded him and they just refused to trade him because they don't want to send him to Miami, they don't like any other team's offers, and they just kept him, I think he would have done what any good professional would do and show up to work and play. I don't think he would have held out or anything. I don't think he would have pulled a James Harden, eat like 100 Big Macs, put on like 50 pounds just to force your way out of a situation. So I don't know. I feel like the Blazers just really handled it really badly in terms of being professional about it. And in Dame's Instagram post, it sounds like he posted something on Instagram yesterday, like his farewell to the team. Yeah. And basically what he said is he's leaving to another team, but he wants to go back to Portland at some point and retire a Blazer, because that's like his home. That's where he's played his entire NBA career. So he still has a lot of love for that city, even though the city and the fans, and even though the organization kind of just screwed him over. But I think he came out the biggest winner of the situation for sure, even though the Blazers didn't really do right by him.
I would say too, to add on to your point, I think the front office is so disrespectful for the fact that, number one, you drafted second overall after making him sit 10 games to get someone as your quote unquote replacement in Scoot Henderson.
Yeah.
And then realizing the history of the Trailblazers, right? There's only really 2 players in that history, or 3 that come to your mind, right? Obviously Brandon Roy, who obviously had his knee injuries and peaked really early in his career. And then Greg Oden, obviously with the injuries, never worked out for him. And then really LaMarcus Aldridge. I mean, besides that, when Dame came into the league, it was literally a LaMarcus Aldridge carried team.
Yeah.
And he ended up leaving a couple years after to San Antonio.
Right.
So the fact that Dame kind of carried those teams, and they did have a couple of coaching changes from Terry Stotts to obviously Chauncey Billups. That team really didn't improve those years that Dame had, and they've had like very good rosters. I mean, besides trading CJ, I mean, it kind of left Dame alone. So I think Dame is the ultimate professional after the cards that he's been dealt. So and overall, like, I mean, he's besides Steph Curry, he's been arguably the best point guard in the league when he's healthy.
Yeah.
Offensively, so.
Yeah. And then I think I'm going to say one last thing about this. You can add on anything else if you want. You brought up a really good point about Scoot Henderson, because I think when the Blazers got the third pick in the draft lottery, I'm pretty sure Dame was adamant about them he wanted them to trade that pick so they could get another really good star player to come to Portland and see if they can get like a Paul George or a Karl Anthony Towns. Like, I don't think that move anything like that would have put them over the top, but it would have given them a much better chance to compete. And I think the whole time that Dame's been in Portland, he was adamant about wanting to stay there. And I never thought the front office did a good job of trying to be aggressive and getting star players to want to play there, because no star player is really going to go there in free agency. So the only way you're going to get them is through trades or get lucky in the draft, like they did when they got Dame. And when you look at it, like, it's funny when you look at it this way, because the Bucks are doing everything in their power to keep their star player in a small market. They developed Chris Middleton. They traded for Eric, like, even back in like 2017 when they traded for Eric Bledsoe. That didn't really work out, but he was a really good player when he was on the Suns. They traded for Drew Holiday, and they just traded for Damian Lillard. Whoever thought that Damian Lillard was going to end up, two superstars would end up playing for the Milwaukee Bucks? And I think that's just a testament to their front office, because they, like you said earlier, they know that if they lose Giannis, they're nothing. And they don't want to go back to that situation, so they're doing everything they can to keep him happy. So I think the Bucks are doing a great job of showing NBA teams, like, if you have a superstar who's happy in a small market, don't take his kindness for weakness. Don't try and take advantage of him. Do what he wants, not everything he wants, but make sure you're taking steps to try and keep him happy and build a contending team. And I think Giannis kind of knew that too, because he never came out and said, oh, I'm going to stay with the Bucks no matter what. Because I think he knew that if he like got complacent in terms of having that one championship ring, then the front office might have sat back and relaxed a little bit. So he kept them on their toes. So I think both sides really played a part in making this work in terms of keeping that small market team like in contending status.
Right. So the last thing I'll say about this, I think what epitomizes the Bucks organization versus Portland is the report saying that the Bucks front office did not consult with Giannis about trading for Dame just because of his relationship with Drew Holiday, right?
Yeah, I saw that.
That's a little thing I would say that players value, just because you do not want to be in the middle of business and you don't want to be in the middle of friendship. So just seeing that the Bucks realized that, and they did not want to cross that line with Giannis, especially being the focal point of their franchise, I think that just kind of shows the volumes that they're opening up and realizing, like, hey, like, if we want Giannis to stay or we want to be a healthy organization, we need to realize all aspects. So I think that's what just epitomizes the Bucks front office being a very good one compared to the Portland one, just from that story that I heard, because that's as real as it gets from a business standpoint. And from a front office standpoint, not a lot of teams or general managers are going to do that. So
yeah, definitely. All right, based on what I'm hearing, it kind of sounds like you and I can go on and on about this, but we do have some other stuff that we want to talk about. Let's switch gears to the NFL, into your team, the Las Vegas Raiders. I was about to call them the nickname you just told me before the show, but I'm not going to do that. We'll call them the Raiders. What is going on with Chandler Jones, dude? It's like he's saying that he's healthy and that basically the Raiders GM is just exiling from the team or something. I saw reports that they like checked him into a mental hospital or something. They think he's going insane. The Raiders they're just a shit show right now. What are your thoughts on your Las Vegas Raiders?
I mean, like I told you, I can go on all day about this team and just all the crazy shit that happens, right? But in terms of Chandler Jones, right? So from what I heard in reports in training camp, he was kind of MIA from near the end of training camp and most of it. So he's been dealing with this sort of issue for a while now, and it was just kind of kept under wraps until I think it was on September or late in August he started posting on social media about his frustrations and not being able to get into the facility. Just because I think in the NFL, if you're a player, you can come into the facility anytime if you want to just train by yourself. Obviously, they promote that stuff, right? So apparently he was MIA this entire training camp because of that. And recently they put him on the NFI list, so non-football illness.
Hmm.
So he was out a minimum of 4 weeks, a minimum. So he wouldn't be able to play, I think, until we put him at week 3, so week 7 or week 6. But now obviously he's arrested. It looks like he broke his sort of his, I think, court order, or I think
Yeah,
team order,
something like that.
right? So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've seen like some of the posts. It's just kind of wild. Like yesterday, he was at a bonfire talking about what Josh McDaniels did to Aaron Hernandez, and he was like kind of crying, but like laughing. I was just so confused. And then he was saying that, oh, y'all don't know what Josh McDaniels did to Aaron Hernandez, this and that. I mean, our team is just a mess. I mean, this is just one dude that like encompasses everything that's going on with the franchise and what has been like the past like 20 years, or that I've been a fan of. I mean, like, it's not helping that also like people are coming out with their stories about Josh McDaniels and how much a piece of shit he is.
Yeah.
Um, and overall that like the Patriot way is just not working, how he is as an actual coach, not just an offensive mind. Obviously how the players are performing, his team is. I mean, I could go on about the Pittsburgh loss and overall this season and what he needs to do before he gets his ass fired, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of like he's on the hot seat. So I mean, with this whole Chandler Jones thing, he's just, I have to say, he's one of many other fucking Raiders players that just can't seem to get their stuff together. But honestly, I wasn't very mad about it just because I knew he might not be able to play this season just because of how bad this is. And in the beginning, a lot of people didn't really know how bad it was as they tried to keep it in house. But I think him posting just hasn't helped. Um, and I think you're kind of just seeing now the kind of culture that the Raiders have. Like, it's so hard to get away from it, you know, like the culture of like the Raiders, you know, is just very like the black and silver, kind of flamboyant personality, and just chaotic management from top. I mean, Mark Davis, since he had to inherit it from his dad, obviously, rest in peace, Al Davis, how poor the franchise has been. I mean, from top to bottom. I mean, they used to play in the Coliseum, and every player hated playing in that. And the only thing that kept that was the fans, right?
Yeah.
So, obviously, the reports of him being like dirt broke, and then obviously moving to Vegas hasn't really helped, as a lot of players had off the field issues. I don't want to name them. You guys already know who they
Yeah.
are. And I just think it just kind of shows one of two things: just poor management from top to bottom, the ownership. I mean, even they have the Allegiant Stadium, the Raiders tickets are the most expensive tickets in the NFL, and you see teams are literally rating
That's a good point.
that.
The
I
game
mean,
on Sunday, it looked like a Steeler home game. It was
yeah, right,
like 85% Steelers fans.
right, like 85%. Like, I mean, when we played the Niners last year, it was the same thing. Like, these teams are just coming into our stadium because our fans do not want to pay these outrageous ticket prices for that product on the field that you see, right? And I think Colin Cowherd made a very good point, saying that the Raiders have the right skill positions and the right talent to be playoff teams or very successful teams, right? You have your solid quarterback play. I mean, this was probably last year with Derek Carr, obviously. Jimmy G is another story I don't want to go into, but he's been awful. You had Derek Carr, obviously. You had a number one receiver, top 3, arguably, Devontae Adams. You had a premier edge rusher in Max Crosby that I think hasn't gotten recognition up until last year.
Yeah.
You did have Chandler Jones on paper, which he did have a very poor year, and he seemed to pick it up. Last year, only had like 4.5 sacks. And then you have arguably the best running back in the game, Josh Jacobs, the rushing king leader last year.
Yeah.
You have Hunter Renfrow, who's your premier third down guy, right? You have a premier left tackle in Colton Miller that I think is starting to turn heads and could possibly be all pro. And then, like I mentioned, you have all the right pieces in a successful team, but it just doesn't work out. So, overall, I just think I'm not surprised by the Chandler Jones thing. I hope he gets better, honestly. Like, I don't wish that upon anybody. And he definitely impacts his team. I could kind of go more into depth about other things, but I think that's pretty much my take on the Raiders, unless you have any other questions for me. So
Yeah. So I'm looking at my screen right now, and apparently, since I don't have like a pro version of Zoom, this meeting is gonna end in like 9 minutes. So I'll very quickly give my take on it. So I think the Raiders had a very questionable offseason. I don't like how they handled the Derek Carr thing. They kind of just benched him at the end of the regular season, put all the blame on him. And I think he was a part of the problem, but he certainly wasn't the problem. And he's in New Orleans right now. Hopefully he can get healthy and go back to balling, because he was playing really good before he got injured. And then they just give his number to some like scrub rookie quarter. He's not a scrub. Like I hope this guy has a good career, but you just give his number to another guy. And then obviously the whole Chandler Jones thing is like so up in the air. I don't really know what's going on with it. And then Josh Jacobs in the offseason, they were able to re-sign him to a new deal, but I don't think he's going to plan on staying there if they can't get it figured out. And then there hasn't been much discussion about it. Like there's no reports, but you have to wonder about Devontae Adams, his status with the team, because he was excited about going to the Raiders, even though they obviously weren't a better organization than Green Bay. The Packers didn't want to pay him a new deal, and he got traded to the Raiders because he wanted to play with Derek Carr. Like they were college teammates, they're boys. He's probably more like, no, I wouldn't say that. He probably has a good relationship with Aaron Rodgers, a really good one. But when you get an opportunity to play with your college quarterback in the NFL, the guy that you went to battle with, and then they just out of nowhere, he's just not there. He doesn't seem to really have a rapport with Jimmy G. Yeah, so
I can go on about Jimmy G all day, man. Apparently he's McDaniels' guy. He's the one that vouched for him in the offseason, gave him that money and that product he's putting on the field. I mean, 5 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And if you looked at the Pittsburgh Steelers game, the 2 bonehead interceptions he threw, not the one at the end, because I understand.
Yeah, just scratch that one. He's just trying to make a play.
I mean, the second one he threw to Pat Peterson, he had a clean pocket, but when he got a little pressure off the edge by TJ Watt, he just threw it into double coverage in the back end where there's no receivers nearby. So he needs to get his shit together and step it up, because it's looking like Derek Carr was not the problem, right? And we can talk about how we feel all about that, but overall, just there's a lot of things up in the air with the Raiders organization, and it's not looking good. I'll just say that. So
yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see what happens with the Raiders if they can, I don't know, figure it out this season. With the limited time that we have left, I want to get into one more discussion with you. I want to talk about Justin Fields and one of the games this weekend, Broncos and Bears. Like, it kind of feels like it's do or die for both of those teams. It was kind of already do or die, because normally when you fall to 0-3, you only have like a one. Like statistically, only I think 1 or 2% of the teams that have fallen to 0-3 have actually gone on to make the playoffs. So it's virtually impossible, statistics wise. But
yes,
if either of these teams, the Broncos or the Bears, fall to 0-4, it's basically game over. And I don't know, just what are your thoughts on Justin Fields in particular, in terms of either how he's played this season, or like how much of the blame should he get for the Bears being absolutely terrible? When they traded back in the draft, they had a chance to draft a quarterback, but I think showed that they want to see what they have in Fields. So they trade with the Panthers and get DJ Moore, a very good, I think he can be a number 1 wide receiver in the NFL. Maybe not on a championship team, but he can be someone's go-to guy, a number 1 guy. And they look worse than last year. Justin Fields looks as bad as he's ever looked. So what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
So the Justin Fields thing is also an interesting one. So I would say when you talk about DJ Moore, I mean, you got weapons now. I mean, you got solid weapons. I mean, Chase Claypool has been awful this year, including that when he got traded. I mean, he has not been the same player that we saw in Pittsburgh. DJ Moore, in my opinion, is a number one receiver on a very average to weak team. Maybe on a championship, he's a two, like one of the best twos. I mean, DJ Moore has one of the best hands in the league. At his size and very elusive, right? This year, he hasn't played well, and that could be due to the lack of targets, just the Bears offense in general. Justin Fields, to me, is a weird option because I think Justin Fields is one of those players, and I'm a big believer that a rookie QB or a young QB needs to sit for a year or two at least. And just get their trade. I mean, you look at Patrick Mahomes and Jordan Love. Those are two players that have developed just by sitting 1 to 2 years on the bench. I think Justin Fields should have been that quarterback to kind of sit, just because Chicago, in my opinion, their roster is not a win now roster when they got him.
No, definitely not.
And I think it didn't help because Justin Fields was labeled a thrower in college, right? Because Ohio State, their offense, right? They had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. He had an early Jameson Williams, right? And then he had Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? JSN, right? So he was throwing the ball constantly and was labeled as this thrower, right? So I feel like it didn't really help his cause just because they kind of forced him into position to be like, oh yeah, but you got to throw, right? You got to play in an NFL pro offense. And overall, Chicago's a very, very poor ran organization. I mean, they've had great staple players. You look at Brian Urlacher, Lance Briggs, Matt Forte, a legacy of winning, right? But recently in franchise, they've just been really poor, top to bottom, organizationally. They fired Lovie Smith when he had, I think, 11-5 or 10-6 record one year, right? That just kind of epitomizes how they are. But the thing is, I have to say, is he's been applauded by former Ohio State teammates as a great leader and a great person he wants to play with. But it kind of shows recently his attitude has been kind of a problem when he's been addressing the media, not putting the blame on himself when I feel like he should. And I just think overall a QB, he needs to sit, which is ultimately the leap for success. I think that's a reason. I mean, you look at last year, right? 17 TDs, 11 interceptions. Nothing really to brag about. I mean, he did have 160 carries for over 1,000 yards. I think he averaged over 7 yards a carry. And you kind of got to see his talent as a runner later on in the season. Even though they did go up, I think 4-12, right? I think it really depends on the system and the players around him. I think they haven't put enough weapons. I mean, their offensive line is arguably one of the worst offensive lines in football. And when he was at Ohio State, he was behind Paris Johnson, arguably the best tackle. And this year so far, I think his QBR is like 21. He has a 58% completion percentage, which is under 60%. 3 TDs, 4 interceptions. He had a horrible game against Kansas City. And I think what teams are doing with quarterbacks that they want them to throw the ball or just making them beat by throwing the ball is just stacking the box. And I think that's what they're doing with Justin Fields and Jimmy G, Lamar Jackson. We're like, hey, we don't want you to beat us by running the ball. We want you to beat them by throwing the ball, right? So I think defense are understanding Justin Fields, and it's the fact that he's going to have to adjust to it. But I also understand the organization and him not sitting maybe a year or two is not helping his cause. So that's honestly how I feel about Justin Fields. So
yeah, I mean, I think, well, first, this recording is going to stop in like less than a minute, so I'll wrap it up. I basically agree with everything you said. It's basically do or die this weekend, because if they don't win, I think they're going to go back into number 1 pick status. But Armaan, bro, thank you so much for coming on the, I don't know, I don't really call it a podcast. I just make videos, but thanks so much for joining me. We talked about a lot of stuff. I'll link your IG in the description if you want, just to get you some followers if you want them. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, sub, share, all that shit. So thank you for watching.